Hey, everybody. I have with me mushroom expert Todd Elliott, who's hailing from Australia. Thanks for joining us, Todd.
Oh, it's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, Todd is a naturalist and a biologist and a photographer from Western North Carolina, but currently he's doing some research in Australia. He's also one of our guest teachers for the new Christopher Hobbs Medicinal Mushroom Program. And he will be teaching a class on biology, ecology, and sustainable harvesting of medicinal mushrooms. So, Todd, I just wanted to ask you, because I don't know you that well, and I was wondering, what got you started in the mushroom, into venturing into mushrooms? What makes you passionate about them?
Oh, well, I grew up in the woods, and I was always interested in the natural world around me. And so for me, it was sort of the natural step of just learning, oh, what's this organism, and what's this plant, what's this, and what's this, and what's this bird, and what's this butterfly, and what's this mushroom. And then I suddenly started to realize that mushrooms were kind of like the forgotten stepchild of the plant world. And so very quickly, I was able to pick up undescribed mushroom species right in my backyard in Western North Carolina. And then from there, that sort of fueled my passion into learning what could I eat and what could I use for medicine, and what was this one related to, and how does this function in the ecosystem. And so it was just sort of a natural progression, and then that has gradually led me to be able to travel all over the world looking at mushrooms and working with people who still living in subsistence ways and harvesting mushrooms and using them for their day-to-day food as well as medicine. And so I'm interested in it from both from a sort of scientific academic standpoint, but also I like to go out in the woods and find a good meal and find things that are
Yeah.
good for my health.
Oh, you sound like a kindred spirit to Christopher Hobbs, actually. He has a very similar story of being in the woods as a youth and that just building a passion for both plants and fungi. So
Yeah.
that's pretty cool. And do you have like a special focus for the work that you're doing right now in Australia?
Well, right now I'm working on a lot of the sort of ecology behind truffles. So truffles are basically underground mushrooms, and you may have heard them in a high-dollar meal in a European restaurant. But there's
Yeah,
actually thousands
sure.
of the truffles, and not just the high-dollar edible ones. There's many, and they're tied in with the tree's roots. They're exchanging nutrients, and they're supporting a lot of the plant communities. But in Australia, there's the greatest diversity of truffles on the planet, and there's tons and tons of little marsupials. We may have heard of in North America, you might hear about kangaroos or wallabies or koalas, but there's all these things like bettongs and bandicoots and potoroos and antechinus and all these obscure little mammals. But it turns out that Australians brought in foxes and cats, and they killed out a lot of these animals. And these animals, 80 to 90% of their diet was composed of these truffles. And when you take them out of the ecosystem, they're not moving these mushrooms through the landscape anymore. And because they're truffles, they can't get their spores out into the air. So my research is trying to understand both the conservation implications of that, but also the health of the Australian forest systems and how that can be restored through that.
Wow, that's fascinating. So does it entail thinking about reintroducing these species? Are they extinct or are they endangered?
Um, some of them are extinct. Some of them are basically functionally extinct, meaning that they're not performing the ecosystem function, even if you can find them in some isolated pockets.
Hmm.
Um, but so a lot of my work is going out, trapping them, weighing them, measuring them, collecting their scats, and then looking through their scats under a microscope to figure out what they're actually eating. So it's been a great excuse to get to see all sorts of interesting parts of Australia,
Oh yeah,
and
that's
also find some good edible mushrooms along the way, because here there's very little work been done on them.
interesting. That is fantastic. I can't even imagine. What an adventure.
It has
Um,
been.
yeah. So I'm wondering if you could share with us why you think it's important for people to understand more about mushrooms, both as food and as medicine.
Well, to me, I look at mushrooms as one of these incredibly nutrient-rich food sources that you can find in the woods. And that's not to belittle the nutritional value of plants. But when you look at most places where the British have moved into, they've obliterated a lot of the traditional use of mushroom knowledge. So they're mycophobic as a culture. They fear the mushrooms. And that has taken away a whole, both from a culinary standpoint, all these interesting things in our diet, but it's also taken away really interesting medicinal properties that we could be using in our health practitioner toolkits. And also we have all these incredible resources from a nutritional standpoint that are just being overlooked. And as you move further east in Europe, there's more and more fungal consumption. Whereas you look at Putin's out picking mushrooms on his hunting holidays. And you look at, as you move the other direction in Europe and across sort of the northern hemisphere, there's less and less fungal consumption. Whereas you get into Asia, there's over 500 species that are eaten regularly and used as medicine. Yeah. And one of the cool things is, like, there was a study in the sort of 1980s, 1990s, where they went back through and looked at all these charms that were carved and used in ceremonial situations among North American native people in sort of the northern US and into Canada. And a lot of those had been labeled by the anthropologists as carved out of wood. And when you actually went back and looked at them, they started doing genetics on them. Most of them were actually carved out of woody mushrooms. Wow. And one of the cool things is those same mushrooms were the same ones that are being used in Siberia to this day in folk medicine. Mm-hmm. So it's sort of one thing that reminds us, across the northern hemisphere, we had very similar medicinal approaches, and also an incredible loss in the knowledge. So part of what I'm interested in is trying to sort of recreate that and understand, both from the cultures that still have that tradition intact, but also sort of applying modern medicinal applications as well as chemistry and all of that to understand what's actually useful in these mushrooms. So that's sort of it in a nutshell to me.
Yeah, so you really, it's safe to say probably that you think people should go beyond opening a bottle full of capsules and popping their little mushroom pills.
Oh, of course. And going out and being able, just like anything, if you have a full connection with picking and harvesting and a direct connection with the mushroom, both psychologically, it gives you more connection and a better sort of interaction with the medicine you're using. That's not to belittle getting something out of a bottle, because not everyone has access to those wild areas to be able to pick it. But to be able, if you have the ability to have the connection with those mushrooms, that just makes it a much more holistic process.
Yeah, that's so great. Well, I want to thank you for joining us for this short little conversation. I'm really looking forward to having you in the program where you'll present your whole hour-long presentation. And I'm looking forward to it. Yeah, I'm sure we're going to learn a lot from you. So thank you so much, Todd.
Thank you.